Lord, thank you for our time together. Thank you, Lord, that uh, we can discuss the business of your death and its impact on the world and on us in particular, Lord. And when I say the business, I don't mean like a commercial business. I mean the aspects. I mean those things that through and through help us to better understand why that was a negotiation that had to occur for us to be able to praise you today, to recognize that from the very beginning you had a plan to rectify the mistake of our forefather Adam. So, Lord, help us to celebrate that. Help us to want to talk exclusively, want to talk extemporaneously, and want to talk continuously about just how great you and are, how great and awesome that you are. Allow our time together, Lord, to be that encourages one another, that we can look back on our week and look forward to the week that will be, if you give that to us. And just help us, Lord, to not use this time as a passage of time, but as a celebration to be able to go back out and do the work that you've asked us to do, Lord, because you bought us with a price. Help us to be aware of that price. Help us to not take for granted, Lord, that we're bought with a price and that you were the utter and absolute propitiation that was necessary to buy us back, to redeem us, Lord, so that we are not your enemies, and help us to celebrate because, Lord, that's what it means to be truly blessed. Amen and amen.
Amen. So, Monday, Michaela had been given a challenge to actually arrive a bit early, and she was actually given a secondary challenge to not go directly to the dojo, but actually be dropped off at Short Pond Park, which ultimately landed there. Anyway, so to not get but so graphic, I dropped her off at the park, and I'm right there near Short Pond Town Center, right. And it's like I found myself by and by sitting in these two large, comfortable chairs that they've got right by the checkout.
Right.
And this guy comes up and he spends his $9.99 plus tax for $19.84, and because they've got it on sale or something like that.
Young guy or old
guy? He seemed middle-aged, I might say. It may be even, a decade behind me, so to speak. But the girl behind the counter, her name is, commented that when she got to the end, she threw the book across. She didn't like the way it ended. And so after the transaction was done, I went up and found out her name and all that kind of stuff, introduced myself, and I said, "What book were you talking about?" Because I didn't hear any of that. And she said, 1984. I'm going, so what did you not like about it? And she told me how it ended, and which I kind of expected now that I was reading it. I knew kind of what was going on. Right. And so it was like, okay. And I told her that this reminded me of Person of Interest, because there's this whole Big Brother's watching you. We've got the machine watching you. There's a parallelism there. And I talked about ASIs and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, at any rate, she said was so excited that she was going to go home when she got off at 2:30 to go and begin watching Person of Interest.
Yep.
Well, I thought I would reciprocate by actually reading 1984. And so we could begin to talk, and this would perhaps allow me to, particularly after reading how the kind of parallels where we are right now as far as Christianity and intolerance, and how intolerance is attributed to Christianity and not to the folks that are intolerant to Christianity, all that kind of stuff, and which is kind of doublethink, by the way. So anyway, I went back Friday just because I'd read by habit, and I wanted to try to catch her when she got off work, but she wasn't working that day. Anyway, I want to try to engage her again in conversation as we talk about Person of Interest 1984 and the technology we have today, and how there's one portion, and this is a side edit. It occurred to me that two things. Number one, he released this in 1949. 1949. And then the next year he dies, by the way. And the second thing is, he's writing about in 1984 that he's not seen, but he's at the same time, because he's not seen some of the developments between 49 and 94, he also doesn't reference things that we might reference, such as moon landing, for example, 20 years later, that kind of thing. So that was just an observation I made. But it was other than that, he is so explicit about how he describes pneumatic tubes, which we can still today understand, even though today we do something different. And we've got, you're being watched right now if you haven't slid your camera thing because, they had two, here he is. They had a two-way telescreen, they called it, where, and it was not too long ago, they were saying they're watching you through your television.
Okay.
So anyway, this is a conversation I'm looking forward to having with Lacey. So it's maybe preparatory for a Jesus encounter, and I just need to how to figure out how to, understand that Jesus is the answer.
Okay, because there's a real easy way to get right into that with this young lady, Lacey.
Well, and I get that. Matter of fact, she is this year turning 39, the same year as Winston. And the other thing is, as I'm reading this thing, I'm going, okay, there is so much revisionist history going on today that he was involved in. There's so much that seems to parallel what we're doing or experiencing, I should say. And the persecution of the Brotherhood is very much like the persecution we're experiencing, just somewhat morally different.
Okay. So, silly question, since that and I'm excited that you had this kind of encounter that's got you excited about potentially moving forward with this. Silly question by me. Does she believe in Jesus? Do you know?
I did not get there. She was getting off work and she had some place to be apparently, and so I think I had something else I was working on for work, and that was another reason I stopped at Barnes and Noble because I had some work to do. So I was kind of distracted. So this is why I want to get back to it. So we did not get a chance to do the actual question, but we've got a common ground we can talk about now that may be of interest to her. And there was another thing that I forget where I said. It might have been last night's meeting. The difference between convenience and conviction.
Mm-hmm.
If it's inconvenient to be in pain, then we might renounce something. But if we have a conviction that whatever they do, they really can't harm us eternally, then we may have a different kind of take on whether or not we renounce what we believe.
Okay.
That's probably enough.
Okay, we'll come back to some elements of that because we've had a lot of discussion, probably as Gene likes to refer to us as the four. It sounds it sounds Star Chamberish. It sounds
Ominous.
Oh yeah, and it's cool. It's kind of a cool. You need capes.
Well, oh yeah. Now we're Fantastic Four.
Or better.
Or better.
Oh, four.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's just cool.
Quotes in my calendar for yesterday evening. I said meeting of the four.
It's funny how churches take credit for being evangelistic. They take credit. They call themselves an evangelistic church, and you've heard me say this a lot. On top of that, then they quote Acts 1:8, and then if you were to interview, you can almost say even the elders, or if not the deacons or the trustees of that particular worship group, you will probably find that they spent no time in evangelism during the course of the week. What makes them evangelistic is that their church believes in missions. So missions do the work, and we get the credit for that. And so, especially when Brother Gene's talking about an exchange where there's relationship building, and I certainly believe that makes sense to do. But I can tell you that there's the long game, and then there's the short game. Okay, and the long game is one we've kind of described to you that happens kind of down when we're at the beach. Is there's people that we know, and they know we're Jesus believers, We just haven't had a chance to preach to them yet. Now, it's not that we don't talk about Jesus. We just haven't had a chance to preach to them yet. I'm looking forward to that because we'll have longer periods of time because we know enough about their lives to be able to, and excuse the churchies, to speak into their lives to say, part of the reason you're experiencing all this junk is because you don't have a sense of peace. Let me tell you where the ultimate source of peace comes from, right? And so you earn the ability to have that kind of conversation because you've listened to them bellyache for so long. Mm-hmm. But the short game is always this one. This is kind of the top of mind awareness. Even if you never see somebody again, you can ask if they believe in Jesus, right? And so you got to weigh: am I so busy and am I so involved, and do I need to get done what I need to get done to the exclusion of saying, do you know Jesus? Right? And at the very least, look, you may not have a chance to help them jump the broom, have them say a prayer, pray with them. You can certainly pray for them, maybe not in their company, but after you leave them. But asking the question at least puts it out there for that person to consider. Right? And that's kind of the gamble that life is if that person doesn't have a chance to leave or to continue living very much after it is that you see them. Let me pause there. Any thoughts about that? I mean, that's a radical way of telling church people to think. It's insulting. That's Gene's job. That's Pastor Bruce's job. It certainly is the missionary's job because we funded them people. That's Ed Hoagland's job. That's Bob. Why do you think we get a newsletter? Because when Bob Kay tells us all the great things he's doing, that's me. That's my jam. So I'm doing what Bob's doing because I'm paying Bob to do it. It's a messed up economy. And folks, some of the things that we're proposing that we're going to be about, and even the way that we're talking about thinking, even some of the discussions we had last week are radical ways of thinking because unfortunately Christians are really good butt sitters. And we're really good this thing happens as you get aged is there's so many thoughts running rampant in your head and you should be able to grab them and then initially spit them out, and then sometimes they don't. And hopefully someday that will change. But I'll need a new brain to do that. But when you change your situational ethics, there you go. Thank you, Lord. Right? So we're talking about the ideal. Last week, for instance, we talked about how do these things work, and some of us are able to go, well, this is the way it works. And let me tell you a weird news situation that maybe some of you have heard about, you don't know about, but have you understand what I mean by situational ethics. A lot of you are familiar with the basketball player Steph Curry. Mm-hmm. Very, very popular. He is potentially the greatest shooter of all time. Mm-hmm. Dad was a member of the NBA. His brother's in the NBA. He's a Pennsylvania guy from Lehigh, I think, maybe. Right? And is a shoot the lights out kind of guy. He can shoot the ball from almost any place in the court with some kind of accuracy. And he is a professed Christian, except his values are very, very much democratic, very, very much social justice, very, very much left-oriented. Right? And so he is making probably $20 to $30 to $40 million a year. Poor guy. Okay. Now he's a guy who is he's a black guy, right? Plays in the NBA. Again, his dad was a star in the NBA, so he wasn't a guy that grew up in poverty. He was a guy that grew up with some means, even if the NBA was making a different amount of money back then. So I say that to say there are a lot of folks who play in the NBA, and I'm going to use the NBA because it's a majority brown people sport, right? And sometimes, in order for them to be pros, they come from really difficult economic situations. But that wasn't this guy, Steph Curry. Seth is his brother. Right? They come from some means. So they live in a neighborhood in, where is it, honey?
It's like
Michigan, Detroit, California. Okay? And they have a home that's probably worth a few $1 million. So it sounds like maybe some of you read this article. So there's some gentrification that's going on, and because California is the place you don't want to live, because you can't. Yeah, look, you go visit Bruce, and Bruce lives in a place that's very expensive to live. But California is way worse because the prices keep going up, and the government keeps spending money on stupid. So the state's pretty much broke. It might as well just fall off the slab and into the ocean because you get no value there. So what they're trying to do is to make some affordable housing, and I think they're talking about 16 kind of apartments or maybe a high rise in the neighborhood.
It's basically like an apartment, but yeah, it's for economic purposes to bring in lower income housing to give people a hand to better their situation.
Correct.
That's the idea behind it.
Yeah,
and he's not thrilled about it because it's going to bring down his property.
Well, let's get there.
Okay, sorry.
And so, because you're right there, is sometimes what happens is even in these environments where there's costly lodging, we need people to work. Mm-hmm. And so if you have people that travel an hour or 2 hours to get to work all the time, it's not really cost effective for them to be working there. So sometimes you build these affordable places so you can have your worker class, your blue class folks live in a place that's affordable.
Richmond's doing the same thing.
Richmond, a lot of the cities that gentrify, Hawaii's talking about doing it.
Richmond is doing it now. They've started.
Yeah. It makes sense. Mm-hmm. And now Richmond's not an unaffordable city.
No, it's not.
But California is, mm-hmm. Period. Okay? And so this gentleman with great means, great wealth, comes from a background where he should understand the underprivileged and the economically challenged, doesn't want this high-rise facility in his neighborhood because he's got concerns, like Sarah said, that it's going to affect his property values. What he's really come out to also say is the crime. He's afraid that there's going to be crime that's going to affect his family, and there's going to be voyeurism, etc. Right? So my point, kind of being, even for Christians, is I like doing things to help with social justice. I'm speaking kind of Steph Curry. I like helping the underprivileged, except when I think it's going to be about me doing something. Except when it affects me. And it's that kind of, that acronym, not in my backyard.
Well, it's because it now becomes too close.
Correct.
For comfort. It's like, if I can help from the outskirts, right, I'm good. All right, well, I can do that because it doesn't really have a direct impact on me.
Correct.
But now that it's literally next door, I'm not so sure about this area. This area's not the best area.
Exactly.
How about a different area?
Correct.
Yeah, like maybe 2 miles over that way.
Yes.
Or 10 miles that way.
Yes.
Whatever.
And this is why we can say, well, any kind of intimacy that's physical outside of marriage is not God-honoring, except when it's in my family. And we talked about that a little bit last week with Amy Grant and some of the folks that we have. I'd almost say maybe Miley Cyrus when she was growing up as Hannah Montana. Different animal altogether, literally. But she seemed to have certain principles. Her family seemed to stand for certain things, right? Billy Ray Cyrus. Right. They seem to be a very Christian-oriented family until Hannah Montana became Miley Cyrus and then decided to flaunt her thing. And now the family has kind of changed their values that, we know what the Christian values are, but this is happening. Yeah.
Dolly's her godmother.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we compromise when it's kind of about me. But you practice that. And we actually kind of uncovered some of that even in our post discussions last week, is that, so it's fine for us to say we're supposed to be evangelistic. Yeah, you do that. So let me pause. Any thoughts about that? That's insulting. How dare you?
Again, some of my comments may be oddly colored because of my recent reading, but the working class was addressed in this book in a way that is basically as a constant. He constantly says the middle and upper are constantly trying to vie vie for power, but the ones that are in what he called the low,
Mhm.
that's what he called them. They're the workers. They're the ones that get things done. They're cheap labor, and so they are. You tried to say blue collar workers.
I couldn't. It didn't come out. It just came out
Yeah,
in class.
I know you got blue workers, and so no. Anyway, so that's what comes to mind when you talk about that. And then as you're saying that, there was a fellow years ago who had a factory that made a wonderful commodity, and the travel that you're talking about was a problem. He needed people who could work and live near where they were, and so Hershey,
Yeah, I
Pennsylvania
thought
was
you were
born.
talking about Mr. Hershey.
Okay. And as this was a benevolence, it also didn't hurt his wealth either.
Mhm.
But at the same time, he's going, this is my need, but at the same time I understood their need. And so he basically builds the town of Hershey. And later I think is part of his world too. So the idea there is he understood the need and was willing to do something about it. Now, this fellow, I'm wondering what he might do if he had an idea that he could be a modern day sort of Hershey. If he would actually, rather than fearing the crime and fearing the drop in value, if he would actually get himself some stock by saying, you know what, I'm going to invest in this and be a part of the solution rather than the problem.
So you're being a very generous outside viewer of this multi-millionaire basketball player. And I say that because, folks, if you're a multi-millionaire basketball player and you have decent financial support, one of the things they're going to tell you early on is probably what?
Invest.
And then donate.
Oh, charity. Okay, charity.
You need write-offs,
Mhm.
right? So he's probably already giving millions of dollars. He's giving millions of dollars away. But like we support our missionaries, giving the money away is different than doing the living, right? So sometimes you believe that when you stroke a check that you're doing it, but what we're seeing with this news report is that his living is not necessarily where his principles have been stated to be.
Right. The other thing that does come to mind is if it is in close proximity to his $1 million home or multi-million-dollar home, there may be a sense of fiefdom come to mind for the people who are in the low income because now this is their king. Blah blah blah. That whether or not it's expressed, but they may begin to think like, okay, that's the big house. We can't go to the big house. I got to stay here in my dingy quarters.
So I don't know if we revere the wealthy these days in that regard. I think that there was a time when we did that, but right now, you can have folks that have $1 million or multi-million-dollar estates in certain neighborhoods, and we don't necessarily feel like we're their servants,
Mhm.
right? And in fact, that's almost a badge of courage for you to say that they live in my neighborhood.
Well, but I'm not talking. I'm talking about if he had actually gone, if he goes through with what I'm suggesting, and now they're living in a home that he had part in building. Now there's a different kind of connection than being near, Michael Brim's house in Montpelier, for example.
Yeah, and I'm trying to bring in the ability to take a look at not necessarily the economic realities of our world. It's the Christian situational ethics that challenge us on a regular basis to consider Jesus encounters. Right? That's really where I'm trying to help us to consider. So when I was doing some work this week, taking a look at church history, but then also doing some work looking at the early church of the Book of Acts, and I get more impressed when I think about potentially what our vision and mission is. And then I take a look at the go capture the world mindset of the guys after Pentecost.
Mm-hmm.
And I find us sorely wanting. We have a fear. We have Whether it's this or whether it's TV or whether it's streamed music, we're so much more interested in what this has got than we are in the person that's across um, the negotiation table. Whether that's in commerce that we're buying something from them or we're sitting next to them on public transit, we've got so much more going on, and we're not on fire. We're not all in to be able to share the good news of the gospel. Now, here's what's funny. You had an encounter with this young lady who hated how the end of Orwell ends in 1984. And what your suggestion was, and this is not a knock, but it's to sort of say where our top of mind awareness is. So your discussion was you need to take a look at person of interest. Now, you know what's funny is in that encounter, especially when I heard Jean say, the chick threw the book across the room because she hated the way it ended. Silly thinking. I had a different thinking that came to my mind at that point. Two, maybe transition that discussion, especially if I wouldn't meet Lacey again. And I'll tell you what that is when we'll come back to it, because it may not be yours and it doesn't have to be yours, but it's the kind of way that my silly head works these days when I think maybe I have an encounter and it's only going to be once. And if I have twice, well, that's not good for you necessarily. So we'll come back to other Jesus encounters. And Diane's been away. Got Bruce hanging out where he is. We've got Michaela now actually out of the house doing some work. So you guys should have some Jesus encounters. So let's hear what you got.
I don't have any this week. It's been a crazy week.
So I don't have any too great to mention. Had a couple conversations on the cruise ships, but most with believers. But I've definitely been thinking and praying about my state of mind, perhaps, I guess, and kind of talking to what you were talking. We're so insulated in our own stuff, our own circumstances, that it's hard for us to reach out to someone as we perceive as different. And after our first Bible study on Wednesday, I mentioned our experiment here in Sunday school, and Wendy, who's a good friend, she was very oh gosh, what is the word? Encouraging for that. I told her, I said, sometimes I feel like I go out, I pray while I'm getting ready to go, but I just don't feel led to anyone. I don't feel like there's that moment of, hey, that person, I need you to talk to that person. So what is that block for me? That's what I'm trying to work on, and to really spend some quiet time, because to me, it means my relationship's not good, right? I don't have that flow of the Holy Spirit that I'm allowing to work in me because I'm too much of a control freak. I'm holding on so tight. So that's what I'm working on.
Hey, Di, I appreciate that what you're saying is I'm praying, I'm having a discussion, a conversation that's ongoing with the Lord to say, can you fix my state of mind? Can you fix my the way that I think? Because I think a lot of that is really about it's how we think. It's funny, and especially joining in with what it is that you're discussing right now, Di. A couple of weeks back, been just a week back. I'm so not a football fan these days that I don't even know who won the big ball contest, whatever they call it, Super Bowl. But I can tell you,
Kansas City Chiefs.
It's not the team who should have won.
Okay. But I can tell you that what you're saying right now, this was discussion that was going on in places that were public where I went to for days following. Mm-hmm. And people would make those kind of comments even if they didn't know other folks. Right? So this lends itself back to a comment that Sarah made either last week or a couple of weeks ago, is that it's not just, and Diane, look, I think it's fair for us to kind of castigate ourselves to say our relationship with our Lord, Savior, and Master is not where it needs to be. But sometimes it's not that. Sometimes what it is it's just genuine fear. It's if we can talk Super Bowl when we don't really even care. We're certainly not vested in it, and we can talk comments about the game that people will never see again. Right. And the Super Bowl is not going to save their lives. It's not going to impact their bank account. And I regularly say, the people that are on any of these teams care about you. Yet we name drop not only either what it is that they've done, but their team and their individual accomplishments. And we feel that that's an okay conversation point. How come we don't feel the same way when it comes to the very creator of the universe?
And it goes back to what I said a week or two.
Yeah.
Right. It goes back. It's a safe topic of conversation, and you're not going to get ostracized. There's my big word for today.
Like it.
You're not going to get you're not going to get beat up typically over that, because there you can have your differing opinions about the teams and it's okay. But sometimes when you bring up Christianity, it tends to
polarize.
Yes, that's the word I want. Thank you. I said separate, but polarize is a better word, because 50 years ago, it would have been fine. It would have been a better place. It would have been easier to bring up. But today, it's not quite so easy. And, you say, it should be easy for you to talk to your family. Yeah, maybe not. Even though there are opportunities there, it's hard to take that first step. Although with mine, I've already been ostracized, so it wouldn't be any worse than where I am right now. But it's a safe topic of conversation. Talk about sports, politics, maybe not quite so safe, but sports definitely. The weather, the crazy weather, definitely is. Those things are safe topics of conversation. But when you get to those polarizing ones, that's when you got to step out.
Agreed.
And it's challenging.
I have a different quandary. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, I find that it's easier for me to talk when I've had a few encounters with the same person versus to punch it out from the get-go. I really struggle with that. And the times that I have, I usually get an earful about how they've been hurt in some way by someone who professed to be a Christian, which then you're trying to mitigate some of that anger and they felt they were let down.
Yeah. The hostility. Yeah.
It's not really even hostility as so much as pain, really. So I find it much easier with someone I've kind of met a few times to get those things in. Sometimes it flows really easy, and then sometimes you just can't hardly get a word in, like my aunt, who I think already knew that I kind of had an agenda. So, at 90, she's sharp as a tack. So, it's just it's difficult for me, for especially a one-on-one first time meeting, and I've got to get through that.
Hey, Jane, hold on a second, dear fuck. Hey, I'm dying. You're 90-year-old up. Is she a believer?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe so. She's had lots of people witness to her, including my mother.
Yeah.
But she's very stubborn.
Yeah. Okay. So I would tell you, she's almost the easiest. She's the easiest to go after.
Your aunt? Her aunt?
Yeah.
Why?
Thank you for asking.
Near the door.
Yes. Say that. Help us understand that. Yes.
Yeah. I didn't know I was going to get to be this old.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm going to get to be that old.
Right.
And she doesn't know that,
the next hour,
next week is going to be there.
Right.
And so there's perhaps an uncertainty or a certainty, depending on how you want to look at it, that she might be more open to the TikTok happening.
Yeah. And so, hey, Di, and this is the significant.
Preston, before you do that, it's funny because when I talked to her on the phone, we had that discussion, and she was so funny saying, "Oh, I'm ready. I think it's time. If I go tomorrow, I'm fine." And I'm like, "So tell me about that." So we had some conversations about that, but when I was one-on-one, never brought that up at all, and I couldn't get it worked in.
Gotcha. Okay. So she was
Plus,
prepared.
it was
She
her
would've thought
birthday.
all that.
How was I going to say, "Oh, you're going to die soon"?
Yeah.
But now she's almost opened that door for her.
Yeah.
So it's almost like she brought it up in a group setting, right? And Diane couldn't she asked some questions, right? But maybe not the really deep questions yet, right?
Yeah.
But now that her aunt has opened that door, doesn't that give her the carte blanche now that when she is with her to just kind of say, hey, can we go back and revisit this conversation? Because aunt brought it.
Yeah.
Not Diane, but the aunt brought it.
Yeah. And I like Diane. Diane's talking about a 90-year-old who's playing a little chess with her.
Yeah.
And it's fun, right? And so if you get your head around the fun, then at some point in time, look, because here's the real question. And Diane is a lot more tactful, respectful, and sane than I am. So she's not going to ask this question. You're going to die soon. What happens? Because that's really the question that needs to be posed, right? The fact that Jimmy Carter is hanging on at hospice at home, he's 98.
Yeah, he's 98.
Any second, he could be dead. So when you're that close to the door, that's a person you need to say, what's going to happen next? And I appreciate that Diane's got an aunt that's got some good gamesmanship going on, but the need for Diane's aunt is more dire than perhaps Lacey, than perhaps some of the folks that we assume may be here tomorrow. But when you're dealing with an 80, 90-year-older, the question's got to be, what's going to happen to you if you ain't here? And that question gets easier to ask when you think about eternity being a reality in some ways, more so for that person than maybe even for me. And there's a gamesmanship. That's kind of where there's a fun in it, because you've got to figure out where in the conversation can I say, what happens when you die? And your death can happen in the next couple minutes. Now, why am I saying it that way? Because we had discussions last week. See, situational ethics. Some of you are afraid to have this kind of discussion and say, excuse me, you are going to be dead soon. Thank you, Steve. I know it sounds crass and it sounds terrible, but that's the reality, right?
Is that the sign we should wear at Walmart? You're going to be dead soon. Come talk to me.
No, because then you look like one of those street preachers preaching Armageddon.
I was saying that tongue in cheek. But you know.
But see, you have an invite in some ways with a person in the hospital, right? If you visit someone who is in the hospital recovering from something dire, it's your untreated.
They let you in.
If they let you in, right? So you have a welcome mat that the person doesn't know that's out there that says, ask me about my hat.
You know, two things now. Thank you. And I'll go to the second one first because that's on my mind. The thing that comes to mind is when you die, what's next? For her, short mind that she has might be estate planning. You know? And so you can actually maybe start with that. But what about the eternity aspect of it? Might be a turn. Just a suggestion, Diane. And the other thing is, I want to go way back because it's almost, I'm trying to rein this in. The whole discussion about it's safe to talk about football. I had an experience where, again, out at Short Pump, I was trying to track down Lacey Friday, and it was late and I was hungry. And so there's a Chinese restaurant there. And I had a thought. As I was walking to the restaurant, I was like, okay, ni hao ma. How are you?
I said, bless you. What?
I can start that, but then it occurred to me that if they think I have any idea what I'm talking about, then they're going to respond, and I can get, well, yeah, now I can get that much, and then it's like, okay, no, that's all I got. Same thing is true with the Super Bowl. I knew who was playing for a change, and I knew who won, but beyond that, I got no clue. I still can't. What is the name of this basketball player you're talking about?
Steph Curry?
Steph
Curry, and his brother Seth, which is not confusing at all.
Curry.
Okay.
Anyway, because I go into if I engage in a conversation, it's like, okay, I want to talk Super Bowl, but I got no clue, so I'm sorry. So I have a fear of even engaging in that because I got nothing.
Yeah, and I did. You're on the other end of the spectrum. In that, the water cooler talk is not that which you're necessarily invested in. But guess what? You're invested in this better than most of us. So the fact that you're now beginning to pair some of that with romantic, with Baroque literature, those are talking elements.
I do not see why you call that literature that.
Romantic.
I don't
It's written during the Romantic era.
Right, those are romantic authors.
If you say so.
That's okay. Yeah, it's Google, Wikipedia. Wikipedia will even tell.
Yeah, but I don't trust that.
Hey, Preston.
Yes, sir.
I got a grenade. I'm just going to throw this out there because what I'm hearing concerns me a little bit. Is that just be straight up, man. Look at 1 Corinthians 12. We're all gifted differently. I think it's quite possible that there are some people who are going to be much more, because of their personalities, capable of witnessing to somebody on the fly in a line, you know, at a grocery store, while others are much more gifted relationally. And I'd hate to see people who are gifted relationally, like kind of where Diane's going. We can beat ourselves up so much for not doing the thing that we're not gifted at, that we forget to do the stuff that we are gifted at. And I don't know. I think it can become really spiritual bondage. I don't know everybody's personality types, but I know Steve's pretty introverted. So I guarantee you, Steve's not going to be the guy normally that's going to accost somebody in a line at the grocery store about Christ. He's just not. And you say, well, you can pray for boldness. Maybe God doesn't want you to do that. The ones that can should. The ones that are built differently probably aren't going to get those opportunities. And Diane's saying, you know, I'm praying for the Lord to open it. Maybe he doesn't want to do that. He wants to do your aunt. He wants to do your neighbor, and build those relationships. And so I don't think there's a one size fits all on this bad boy. I really don't. And not that you said it that way, but we can so beat ourselves up trying to make ourselves do something we're not gifted to do, that we're not going to do with the stuff that we are gifted to do. And so I keep listening to this and I'm thinking, you know, I think the Lord would rather you, if your gifting is to invest in somebody and lead them to Christ over a period of time, but you can't do it because you make yourself think you're not good at it, so you don't do it ever. I hope that makes sense, and I'm welcome to take the hits on that, but not everybody is wired the same way. We're not going to do it the same way. It just says, as you're going, make disciples. It doesn't exactly say how to make disciples. Does that make sense?
As a matter of fact, it makes incredible sense, because I was thinking the very thing you're quoting, because it says make disciples, discipline learners. It doesn't say make converts. He doesn't say even evangelize. He just says make disciples. So that could be finding someone who's new in Christ and having a part in growing them. It could be, and as you go, again, I'm maybe just a skosh more outgoing than Steve is, but I don't know why Lacey's comment struck me. It was like, you know, this is interesting. Why would she get so animated about the end of a book and what was the book and all that kind of thing? And then this is a relational sort of thing. I agree. I think we have different giftings, and as we go, making disciples may look different for different people. And by the way, there is I believe, a gift of evangelism. At the same time, we are all given that commission.
Bruce, think that you're right on it. I mean, I'm trying not to beat myself up, because I am trying to go out open to the opportunities. And if they aren't presented to me, then that's not on me. as long as I'm open to it and I'm willing to be there for whoever he puts in front of me. And I'm also trying to look around. Does someone look like they're hurt or in need? I do try to always acknowledge people, which I think is something we don't do well anymore, especially if we have our to-do list. You know, to encourage. That's something I'm really good at when I'm out and about, which may or may not lead to a conversation. But to me, the more important thing is the relationship, and then maybe the mentorship part, which I don't think we talk about enough, of that person. And, you know, with Wendy, I feel like there might be an opportunity for us to encourage each other, which I'm really excited about, because you don't often find those persons who are willing to invest that time in you. So I like what you said, Bruce. Thank you.
Well, the
Just to
fact that
follow up on that, Jay McSwain talks about in Place Ministries, he talks about the fact that you serve out of your giftedness. So everybody that's a teacher may not have the gift of teaching. They may teach out of the gift of shepherding. They may teach out of the gift of helps. But ultimately, the Lord takes their gifting and channels it into an effective ministry. And so what you just said, I think is really vital. It's like you may not evangelize out of the gift of evangelism, Diane. You may evangelize out of the gift of helps. You may evangelize out of the gift of mercy, because perhaps that's how the Lord is going to use you, is that you say, how may I help? And then as you help that person, you get the opportunity to say, you know, well, I'm helping you through the name of Jesus, and I'm just really shorthanding it there. But you get that opportunity. It's not going to be perhaps a pithy way of doing it or a clever way of doing it. It may be a merciful way of ministering to somebody and evangelizing them. So I think where you're heading on that is really right. You're listening for the Spirit to give you the direction, and he'll open those up, as opposed to going, I got to go out and get mine today. Instead, how may I help you? How may I serve you? That's an amazing, very Christ-like way to evangelize in my mind.
No commentary?
I will say, Preston, that I'm glad you're doing this. I'm glad that you put this kind of challenge in front of us, because it's made me more aware of, you know, as a Christian, I should be serving. And how does he want to use me? Whatever that may be, it's at least started that conversation within my own relationship with him to see where it takes me. So I'm definitely more aware. I may not be the best all the time, but I think in that, like you said, that muscle you're exercising, you're going to find that thing because you're seeking it. So I'm excited to see where he is going to plug me in.
I was reminded as Bruce was talking about helping. I was reading, and I was sitting in front of a Pleasance Hardware in one of their Adirondack chairs, and I saw a guy pull up with the back of his van flopping, and he had just put in apparently a piece of furniture, and the string that they had afforded him was insufficient to keep it closed. And basically, I helped. I had rope, and I could give him some rope, and he would be able to have it closed tighter and all that kind of thing. And so we worked together on that. And I made reference to scout knots and all that, but never got around to talking about Jesus. Mm-hmm. And it was like, okay, I didn't even go to, in Jesus' name, be blessed, sanctum, etc. Down around this go shut a week, whatever. I never got to that, but I helped him. They introduced each other, that kind of thing. But I don't know whether I'm going to see him again, and that should have been perhaps an opportunity. But I was more comfortable in helping than I was in helping.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Hey, Preston, by the way, nothing I said is, I'm not cutting across your bow at all. Everything you're doing, I agree with. And I think it's really important that we not miss the fact that very seldom do you tell us about your Jesus encounters. And so not doing that, you don't game it, because people will start to go, oh, well, I have to do it like Preston, which that's always been a challenge with leaders in churches anyways. Like they think, well, because the pastor went out and led 16 people to Christ this week, I guess I need to do that. And so they don't get the one that the Lord called them to get, because they can't get the 16. So, but yeah, just I want to agree with Diane that I appreciate the challenge. Just we can't get ourselves caught up in there's only one way to do this.
There's also, I appreciate you mentioning that, Bruce, because when I was at Liberty, there was this old bald dude that was very, very ferocious about getting tracts in people's hands. He had even mastered an art of when he saw somebody walking on the road, he knew exactly how to toss a tract out of his car to have it land right at their feet. It was amazing. And he would do it one way for one side of the street and one way for the other side of the street. And he could actually get tracts, the word of God, into people's hands so they would learn what Jesus is all about. But I'm sorry, I'm not Sumner Wimp. I tried that. I used to carry the tracts, but then bring them all home again because that was just not my gifting, my outfitting. So I appreciate your saying that, because not everybody. J.O. Grooms, wow, what a great evangelist! And he would get people on the phone, and why they didn't hang up on him, I don't know, because he just kept on and kept on and kept on. He was tenacious. I can't be a J.O. Grooms either. I have to be Gene Thomason.
Oh man,
Yeah, it does. And I'm going to do my very best to be the best version of myself. I love that.
What votes? What votes? All right, so I appreciate very much what Bruce just said. Let me try to put this in perspective if I can. I'm going to use a bit of a sports analogy, and I think for certainly the athletes among us, you guys will appreciate this. And I'll try to make it basic enough that we all can grasp it. And instead of using basketball, which I would typically use, I could use volleyball, but let's use baseball, because I think most of us have an understanding of baseball, right? So, no.
Pitches on a baseball. That's what I know.
Okay, that's good trivia to never. No, okay, good.
108.
Okay.
Okay.
So, what's the point of a baseball team?
I don't know. That's why I don't watch it.
It's to win the game, but in order to win the game, you have to
Get the right people.
Play together.
Okay, you got to play together. You have to.
Get the right people.
You have to get the right people, and then you have to do one of two things.
Practice.
Catch, run, pitch.
Okay.
One of four things.
You have to get 3 outs per inning. You have to hit the ball.
Yeah, and run the bases.
Bad question.
I think are 90 yards apart.
Have to be tactical.
Go home.
Are you sure you want to go down the baseball road? Are you sure you want to go down the baseball road?
It's already exploded.
Know your opponent's weaknesses.
You did this.
Okay.
Wow, that's funny.
Raina said.
There are. All of these things are important for a baseball team, but perhaps there are 2 to 3 elements that are the most important. All right. So one is
Scoring points.
while playing like a team, you need to score. And in the absence of playing like, if you're playing like a team, and in the absence of scoring, you've got to hold the other team scoreless, right? Because either you potentially will,
Or at least limit their scoring.
Yes, but you'd like their score to be less than your scoring.
That's what I meant by limits.
Yeah, but if you can't score, you don't want them to score either.
I am so.
Are you sure like I said, are you sure you want to go down this road?
No, you know what?
You open that door.
I'm going to retract that I even suggested baseball. Let me address it this way and say, Pastor Bruce is right on that, and I would hope that what you're not getting is a one size fit all. What I'm trying to get us to do is this: let's get in the game. Let's get in the game. So it's real easy for a church of 2,000 people to claim that they're an evangelistic church because they have 2 to 7 guys, and some of them they don't even know that are going to do the work, and then we take credit for it. See, but it's easier to take credit for the work if this is the size that we are, and we win a game together because we're close enough that we recognize that some of us catch, some of us back to it.
Set spike, bump set spike.
Sure, that some of us are doing those 3 basic elements, perhaps, that are a part of volleyball, right? In order to help us to win games. But the bigger sports analogy that I was presenting is certainly as a coach and as a manager, you want your team, number one, to know how to play the game. Number two, you want to understand. Some guys are going to be the folks who are going to serve really well for you, and some guys are going to be the guys who are going to spike really well for you, and some guys are going to play defense really well for you. But you can take credit as a team if you're out there playing. And typically, the folks that are involved in worship today aren't even in the game. They're not engaged that way. Their engagement is that they have a subscription to Sports Illustrated. And they're pleased that when the Super Bowl comes home, they get to read about it, and thus their team wins. Yay, we win. So I appreciate when Diane says, I'm praying to the Holy Spirit to ask me, to encourage, to move, to motivate me, to prompt me to X and so, because that's top of mind awareness. That's where we need to be. How it plays out for you all, especially because you have very distinctive personalities, it certainly is going to look differently. So when I tell you, I may walk up to an old person and say, "Are you dead yet?" Right? That's my way. Pretty close.
You got your shovel with you?
Right, exactly. Wow. That kind of stuff.
Did I say that?
You did say that out loud. But we need to be in the game. And that's where hopefully part of our discussion today, we're going to talk about our projects for 2022, right? Which is, it's February now, so we really should be able to reflect on this. Because like Bruce says, it's really important that we go and we make disciples. Well, the only way to be able to make disciples is let somebody know, excuse me, I have something to teach. And I'm available to help teach it. And so sometimes the easiest place to do that is with people you know and with your family. And I hear you, Sarah. Yes. Look, Jesus demonstrated it perfectly that a prophet has no honor in his hometown. It is the worst place almost to say, excuse me, I'm here to bring good news from the Lord.
Think about it. He had to go to the cross, die, and resurrect for his brothers to go, oh, okay.
I'm not just the guy who used to beat us, have pillow fights with us. So, but we need to be in the game. And that's where that is. And so sometimes, there's a guy playing basketball right now, kind of. His name is Ben Simmons. And I say basketball because I'm a casual basketball fan these days. I'm not ardent the way that I used to be, or notoriously invested. But there's a guy, he plays for the Philadelphia 76ers, and his name is Ben Simmons. He's about a 6'10" guy, and he plays the position of guard. Now, here's the reason I'm telling you this. He has phenomenal basketball skills. He can pass the ball, he can dribble the ball, and inside where the basket is, he's really very, very devastating in terms of being able to score. But right now, he won't shoot the ball. And so he's sitting right now because he's got a combination of injury and a head case going on because his coaches and everyone is saying, why won't he shoot the ball? Well, part of the game of basketball says that if you get the ball and you're in a position where you can score a point, you should shoot the ball. Right. That's what our engagement is to be able to present to us that situations that we think are mundane and off the chart and invaluable as potentially harvest and witness field, those are available to us. To help us to have top of mind awareness to say, when there's an opportunity to shoot the ball, shoot the ball. But also, look, part of the reason that we have spiritual gifting that is in our purview in terms of helping us all to master that and understand how we work in conjunction, then if it's not your chance, if you don't have a good shot, pass the ball. If you can't pass the ball, rebound the ball. And if you can't do any of those, consider the game and say, where could I have played better, differently, harder to contribute to us winning? That's what I would like that Diane's doing when she's asking the Lord to say, Holy Spirit, make me aware. Because the idea is, and Pastor Bruce said this brilliantly. Stevens is different from Gene, whose is different from the boss lady here. So with those variations of personalities, y'all gonna do this thing differently, but you got to be about it. Because you said this wonderfully. Yeah, there's a gift of evangelism, but all of us have the directive to, as we go, make disciples. But the making disciples means you can't just go, hey, pal, guess what? Read my mind. It's something you need to know. And I can teach you, and I can support you through that, but you got to be out there.
One of the other things about your, and I don't mean to bring up your sore spot, but your baseball analogy, there was a guy at one time, they referred to him as Babe Ruth, who was at one time the quintessential home run hitter of the time. He's been, I think, eclipsed by a couple of other, Barry Bonds or Hank Aaron or a few others. Anyway, but at one time, he was the one that when you thought about a home run hitter in baseball, you thought about Babe Ruth.
Yep.
But what a lot of folks don't realize is he could has easily been termed the biggest strikeout because he struck out probably as much or more than he actually hit when he got up to bat because he was looking to, go for the monster. So the point I'm making is we can, not every track Sumner Went tossed out his car window brought fruit. Not every phone call J.O. Grooms made brought fruit. Not every contact we make, even as we're aware, is going to actually immediately bring fruit. But as Paul said, I plant, another waters, God gives the increase. It really is all up to him.
Yeah, but we're a team.
That's right.
And we're a team that should be understanding what makes us a team and what the responsibilities of team membership looks like and what a win is. And that's been a lot of what we've been doing over the past year is redefining what a win is. And a win is not bucks and butts in the chair. A win is when eternally the Lord looks at us and says, that's my child doing what it is that they're supposed to do. That is investment into well done, good and faithful servants. So you get to push back. The floor is open.
So we're not doing well as a team. If you look at,
yeah, go ahead, Diane.
if you look at the results over the last year or the last 6 months of this experiment, because there's no new people sitting with us. So it says to me that we're not a team yet. We have a lot of work to do. I jumped out with strategy. Teams, they look at other teams. They look at how a player reacts to certain pitches. We got to know how the devil's working in the world, but also how we work together. And I don't think we've had an opportunity to do that very often. And I've been looking for opportunities. It's just hard to find something that's on a Saturday or even a Sunday. So if anyone finds an opportunity or has a suggestion of something that we could work together as a team, I think that would be a good next step for us.
On thoughts?
I do have another thought, but I'm hesitant to share it.
I'll just blurt it out.
Years ago, there were two baseball teams in New York. One was the Mets, the other the Yankees. The Mets went to the World Series. The Yankees did not. Both of them had excellent players. And both of them were identified by uniform and continuity as teams. But the Mets went to the World Series because they played as a team. The Yankees were filled with great players that were all superstars in their own right and did not play as a team. And the point I'm making is maybe we need to take these skills we've got, as Diane said, in a variety of ways and see how they work together as a team. And that's what I was thinking.
That's a wonderful point. Di, I think that the point that you made is a very good one, and I think we're actually in the process of doing some discussion in addition to some thinking as to the makeup of this group is not necessarily one that lends itself to people drawing to us. Mm-hmm. And if we're honest enough, that's not necessarily a permanent failure, but it suggests that we need to be operating perhaps a little different. And please understand too, just growing people doesn't say you're about our Father's business, right? Because if there were cute little other things that we would do, we probably could be able to do that where you have a lot of programs and where you've got a nice flashy building and a lot of those things. The locale, the logistics, where you are, all of those sort of things, and then the thrust of what you're about. Right now, where we are is a real incubation period, but I don't know that we do a very good job selling our team. And that may be because of the personalities that we have, in that we're folks who aren't very cheerleader-esque. But that may change as we go forward, because sometimes you need that in your body to be able to rally your team. You usually have one or two guys on the team that help to fire folks up, whether it's volleyball, whether it's basketball, whether it's, you've got guys like Rudy. You guys have seen the movie Rudy, right? You got guys who inspire other folks, and then those folks sometimes are better and present better and differently than they do. But it's all about the team. Even though you have one individual, but again, going back to each have individual gifts. And so using those gifts at all and using them the right way and in conjunction with each other, those are wins. And I don't know that yet we're doing that consistently and well. But I would also say I don't think churches are doing it at all. People show up and they hear about this stuff, they read about this stuff, they hear sermons about this stuff, and yet it never gets implemented. So I'm not patting us on the back going, well, we're better off. But what I am saying is we're taking a hard look at what spring training is. That's what we're doing. We're doing spring training. We're just stuck on baseball.
Hey, Preston,
spring training helps it. Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Let me go ahead and torture that baseball analogy a little bit more then. Part of spring training is everybody gets together in Florida and Arizona and they play games against other teams. And I know this is where this analogy is going to fall apart. Part of playing against another team is actually working together to make each team's skill sets better, right? And so, my thought when you say, how can we sharpen our teeth as far as this is concerned? I'm going to just give you a real straight up suggestion. There's a guy named Bucky that floats around in this group, and him and his gang are regularly out there doing outreach events, and it is as shoe leather as it gets. And I'll tell you, back in the day, Bucky and his associates had a lot to do with stirring me to being more focused on reaching people in several different areas. And I just wonder if that may be something where the critical mass of the gang sitting in Gene's house right now is not such that you can do a lot of events. And not that events is the answer to everything, but partner with somebody. If you're doing spring training, partner with somebody, sharpen your teeth at this thing, get better at your position. And so I would suggest that perhaps the thing is the next time those guys, and they're doing them all the time, spring's coming, is the next time that they go out and do an outreach event, is go hang with them. You guys have done it before, and you got to admit, when you come back from one of those, you're pretty energized, and you've had the opportunity, most likely, in a situation where you're not by yourself, to be able to talk to people about kingdom things.
You're not wrong there at all, Bruce. And I think that we had one occasion, maybe last year, to do something of the sort. But we also don't have necessarily a clamor that comes from within that says, "Guys, let's find where there's kingdom value activity going on, and let's join with it." And you're right that Bucky's crew is very, very much about the doing and doing and for the right reason. And so there's a blending of things. There are things we could lend to their enterprise, and certainly things that they can lend to our enterprise. And we're in the process of discussing some of that. But folks, we've got to have a willingness to kind of do what Diane's saying. Diane says, "I'm looking for opportunities for us to go and get involved." And Brother Gene has said, sometimes the way that you best learn what people's gifting and how to appreciate folks is by praying and serving and working together. Some of that stuff has got to be a part of our DNA, even as a small group like this. In fact, we should almost be more flexible and portable as a smaller group like this, because we don't need to work the whole arm of a church organization. But I think that those are things also that will impress and impact our top of mind awareness. And those opportunities, when you go there, especially if you're plugged in the right way, please appreciate, they're artificial opportunities for you to practice top of mind awareness, where you're doing a thing and you can say, "I'm here because Jesus allowed me to be here." Can I pray with you? Do you know Jesus? Can I help you to be introduced to who he is? Can I read scripture with you? Those are all occasions where you can do that. So our last outreach was one where I invited a guy along because he was really struggling at the time, and he got to see some of that enacted and in motion. I'm hoping that it impacts him for good kingdom positivity. But the nature of the activity itself lends itself for us to be able to practice this kind of thing that we're talking about now as a smaller group. So you're right on there, Pastor Bruce. Thoughts? Well, so let me see. Look at 10:55. So there may be, and we'll talk about this perhaps during the course of the week. We may think about a road trip, or some of us may road trip, so we may have fragmented worship in some regard over the next couple of weeks, or we'll figure out how we'll do that. So maybe our worship day is not Sunday. We'll figure out what that is, but we'll talk about it as we know better, because we've got some really nice things that are in our front window that we're looking through, and we'll continue to address those. But if we do get together next week or the following week, I'd like you, if you need to make some notes, talk about your 2022 encounter, what that Jesus project looked like. And I would also encourage you that if you had a 2022 project, you should have a 2023 project. Okay? I think the Jenkins kind of talked to us a little bit about their 2022 project, so other folks are going to be up to bat when we next engage. I can't run, so I might as well just embrace it. You're going to be up to bat, and I'm going to look forward to all of us. And this is a little bit of a different situation than the one that Pastor Bruce talked about, because your 2022 project, you have 52 weeks for that. So the crazy encounter in Walmart with the Shrek dude in terms of figuring out how many layers do I need to get through here, etc. That certainly is one of those spontaneous ones, and that's one where I may not really be prepared to do that. I may just need to leave this guy with a Lord bless you kind of moment. But when you have 52 weeks to plan it out, well, you have 52 weeks to work through that. So there should be some kind of return for the weird or for the talent for 2022. Okay. And what I'll do is I'm going to do something that Bruce accused me of not doing in the right way, but I'll end on that note because I think we've got like four minutes or so left. I had shared with you, by the way, sometimes what you can do with people is, and maybe I do this a little bit more. I think Bruce does this kind of less purposefully, but during the course of the week, I'll ask you guys sometimes, how's the week going? What's happening? What are you doing? I probably do some of that more with maybe Sherry, Jerry, and certainly Bruce and I interact often enough where he's got projects happening or potential projects, and we'll talk about kind of where that is, and maybe not kind of in this direct church way. It's just it's a normal part of our conversation. What's happening, and then you find that out. So sometimes it's okay to follow up with folks if you hear a thing and say, what's going on with that? What's going on with it? So if you remember a few weeks ago, I had told you that I was very impressed by a Jehovah's Witness who came to our house, who had looked to encounter us, couldn't do that, so she wrote a letter and dropped it off in her mailbox. And I told you I was going to follow that up. Well, he asked me, did I follow it? I did follow it. She not only left us a letter, but in her letter she left us her phone number and address. So in this day and age, I thought showing up at her house, thank you very much, Sarah, would perhaps put me in stalker category. So because I didn't feel like reiterating directly to the police that Blue Lives Matter, I thought I would perhaps negotiate against showing up at her house. So the unfortunate part is she didn't answer the phone. But I left her a message. And the message stated, I'm the person whose home you came to. You missed my wife and myself. And I said, first, I'd like to encourage you. I'd like to encourage you that you believed in the truth that you have so much so that you not only perhaps visited in tandem with someone, but you also left a message to let us know that you had visited and you wanted to follow it up. I said, I applaud it. I said, I encourage that. I said, but I also hope that you're doing that for the right kingdom reasons. And I said, if you would like, I said, I am available to be able to talk with you about the New World Translation that you use as a Jehovah's Witness. I said, I'm available to be able to speak with you about the book of John and its correct translation if you'd so like to have that discussion. I said, so please consider this a positive phone call, but I'm available if you are willing to have an eternity check so that we both can be assured that we'll be in eternity together. See you later.
Have you heard back?
And that'd be enough.
Okay. I was just curious. Well, but I was just curious because, I can see why too, but I would have been more fascinated had she actually reached back out to you.
But when you start bringing up their translation, they feel
Testing?
Well, sure, because a lot of their faith pivots on the translation, but even a lot of their traditions and practices are just not biblically oriented. You can't celebrate your birthday. You can't pledge the flag. You can't say the Pledge of Allegiance. You can't celebrate your birthday, right? Easter, you can kind of celebrate Easter, but typically you can't. And the reason that you sometimes want to get into things is you want to be able to help push back on the fact that, look, not only was Yahweh big on celebrations, but Jesus was. All through Jesus' ministry, all through the 4 books of Gospels, you see Jesus showing up to celebrate stuff. So where folks decided to come up with a contradictory way of transitioning and translating the Bible, those are questions. And so, Steve's right when I'm saying the New World Translation, but the New World Translation, you got to understand a little bit about how people came up with the Greek. Pretty much they didn't like certain stuff, so they changed it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a God. already you're missing the whole foundation of, thank you very much, appreciate that face, Sarah. You're already missing the whole point of what John's about if you change that to an indefinite article.
That one change changes everything.
It does. And so that's why Jesus is here. He is not God. He's here.
And I have, number one, you didn't get a call back because she was not prideful enough to think, I can take on this dude that knows something about translation. That's probably what it was. And she didn't want to go to her teammate, if you will, and say, we can take them on together. So, number one. Number two, I've read that. I've seen that and in the New World Translation or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, how many times have I said in this room and in other places we've gathered, there is a reason and an emphasis that the absence of the definite article in the Greek gives us that they're completely missing by just using our default indefinite article in English to do that.
Correct.
We need to understand that better. Because I know Sarah, she kind of made that face, was like, yeah, that's where they're messed up. That's where they're all messed up. So, and by the way, Greek, they didn't come up with the Greek. The Greek was what they wrote it. I'm not understanding.
So they determined that they wanted certain words to not mean what they meant.
Yeah, from my understanding, is the actual group that translated the New Testament, which was written in Koine Greek, didn't actually understand Koine.
Correct.
Okay.
So they actually translated the best to fit the theology.
Correct.
So, which basically
There's a deeper problem with their entire theology, though, is if you start to look and read the notes that go along with their Bible, they can't, they will not discern between prose and poetry, for example. And so I've read some of their commentary on, because every reference to Jesus as God in their Bible has been changed, just every single one. But there's a couple of places where, and I can't remember where it is now, but in one in particular, it was like, well, they're like saying the word that they changed. They're like, well, it means this, but they're referencing a poetic passage, and so they're looking at imagery versus something that was literal. And so there's a real lack of scholarship in their Bible, quite frankly, way beyond what Steve just talked about, which is pretty major, that you don't understand the language. But they don't seem to even understand basic English literature, quite frankly. And so that all of that's kind of out there. But when you've got people that, in a lot of cases in the Jehovah's Witness world, they're not really well educated people, so they're just taking it face value.
Some of the difficulty with witnessing to these groups who claim to be Christian borders on what Pastor just brought up. Is you need to know a lot about why you believe Jesus is Lord, but you also need to know at least enough to be in the conversation to help them recognize where they misunderstand. And one of those really can come in with Jehovah versus Yahweh. And just like Steve sort of intimated, they will get mad at you. My wife has unfortunately witnessed this happening when I walk up to Jehovah's Witnesses tables and I say, "That's not his name." And
I tried that once. Not go to the table. They came and showed it.
that doesn't go over well. Some of them will get very loud and they'll disengage from the conversation. And I'm not saying that, folks, to do an us and them. I'm telling you the challenges that are in the world when you look to have Jesus encountered. And this is with folks who claim to know Jesus, right? So they're going to be weirder when you're meeting folks who don't know Jesus. But you've got to optimize what that conversation is. And so, for instance, going back to Jean's original Lacey comment, which I liked a whole lot. Lady read the end of Orwell through the book across the room. Silly me, I would say, I know a book that's got a really good ending. Really good ending. And you'd like that better, especially in a bookstore. And that's just the silliness that's on my mind, if that's the conversation I heard, and then she's going to explain that to me later on and say, let me show you a really good book. In fact, it really is the good book. And that kind of silly top of mind awareness is sometimes where I hover. Now, please understand too, and maybe I'll do this more to help Diane not kick herself so much. I have a whole lot of failures, but the failures are pretty funny. I think they're hilarious at this point, in part because I'm stupid enough to put myself in position to do that, and then I'm also okay with potentially the rejection or the weirdo look. Okay with it. In part because I'm 6'4", and if you weirdo too much at me, I may have to go out the door. I may have to go Peter and get my sword and cut your ear off. That was supposed to be funny, guys. It was supposed to be funny. That was bad move by Pete. Bad man. But
yeah, the only reason he missed is because Malchus ducked. He was trying to, get the part there.
Please be aware of the flip side, though, too. Because I was listening to Glenn Beck this week bring somebody in who was talking about evangelism, power of Jesus, the need for Jesus in our society today. And Glenn Beck has, unless something's changed, is an avowed Latter-day Saint. So, but when you hear him talk, he sounds like he is a Jesus believer the way that we are in terms of understanding the foundation and the fundamentals of the Bible here. So there are going to be people, and this has kind of been, Bruce has said this recently, I think I've said this, I think even Steve has kind of chimed in with this. Folks, there are going to be people who are going to be in eternity, despite the fact that they were in the Latter-day Saints church, despite the fact that they were Jehovah's Witnesses, because Jesus can work through the noise, even if there's false teaching and false teachers, right? And so we've got to get very, very good at championing the fact that folks are presenting the gospel, because that maybe makes it easier for us to disciple, to mentor, and to straighten it out, right? And so instead of just going, look at those bad cults, we need to know what makes them cults, and we've had a lesson on that, a few lessons on that in the past, but we also need to recognize where the conversation points are to be able to mentor and disciple those folks away from weird. And so as opposed to running from it, which church people typically do, kind of run toward it. By the way, that's what the EMTs did on 9/11. Mm-hmm. That's what the folks who were looking to save folks were running toward the disaster. And folks, that's kind of what this is all about for us, is teaching us to run where the trauma is, because we have a solution to the trauma. But we at least have to get out of our trucks. We at least have to wear our EMT badges and suits, have our certification, and be ready to use it. And we're going to perhaps use those skills differently, even though we've got the same training, right? But I may not do triage as well as you're going to do CPR. I may not be able to to practice phlebotomy as well as Gene's going to be able to stabilize someone in critical condition at the scene of the trauma. But we should be running toward the trauma. So, all right, last comments. Thank you all for putting up this week. Thoughts, stuff.
Hey, does anybody have any thoughts of the movie that's out now called The Jesus Revolution?
I can tell you that they actually had I guess it's called a director's cut.
Yeah.
Up at Liberty a few weeks ago, and Nathan went to see it, and he actually thought it was pretty good.
Okay.
So I can give you that, but this wasn't like the final cut that was making the movie theater. I guess this is like a pre-version of it, and they may have taken some
longer sometimes,
right, and they may have taken some things out because they asked the people that came to watch it for some feedback.
Right.
So, but he said it was pretty good. He was actually surprised that it was as good as it was, because he was like, I just don't want it to suck. That was exactly what he said.
Yeah.
And he said it didn't. He said it was pretty good.
Yeah, and it's a Lionsgate film. I almost talked about it today. Lionsgate usually does a pretty good job. I usually get concerned when they're the Kendrick brothers, because those are popular movies, but they're only popular within a certain kind of set. Lionsgate is going to be spending a little bit more money, and I mentioned, I think last week, the lead guy, or one of the lead guys in it, he's the guy from the Chosen series who plays Jesus. And I don't know who he plays in this one. But I think Bruce maybe expounded on this a little bit last week too. This is kind of going to be how the hippies of the 60s became the movers and the shakers for Jesus in the 70s and 80s. In fact, the Calvary Chapel came out of this whole Jesus movement. So Chuck Smith, that church that's verse by verse, came out of the Jesus movement.
Yeah, I do know.
Greg Laurie.
Greg Laurie, yeah.
I've seen some interviews with Kelsey Grammer playing Chuck Smith in the movie, and it seemed to have really had an impact on him. So he's talked about the movie, and I think a little bit of his own personal faith, and has broken down in tears in some of the interviews that I've seen. So it seems to have affected him as well.
We know he's an ardent Catholic, so if folks are breaking out of the traditional aspects of Catholicism and recognizing who Jesus is through the universality of the Catholic Church as opposed to the Roman Catholic Church, bravo.
Isn't and this is ignorance on my part, so I'm asking for information. Isn't Stallone like one of the driving forces behind Lionsgate?
You mean Sylvester Stallone?
Yeah.
He's a professed Catholic as well. So that he would be an investor is not surprising, especially because he lost so much with the Rocky franchise. It would make sense. The money is in.
My point is, isn't he instrumental in what they do?
That's what I mean. Is that it makes sense that the money's not necessarily in just the acting; it's on the production end.
Sure.
Yeah, with the studios, it's owning a piece of what produces the property.
Yeah, you see Lionsgate, you think Stallone. Yeah. You see Steamroller, you think Seagal, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't know for certain. I haven't looked at it recently, but that would make sense. Is that's how you make your really big money, is being a part of the studio production as opposed to just the actor.
And I'm basically referencing the fact that I thought I had heard that Stallone had actually become a Christian. And
he's professed that he's a Catholic for many years.
Okay.
So
I don't know if I mentioned it last week. Did I mention about Danny Lehman last week?
I don't think so.
No.
Yeah, Danny Lehman has been for many years one of the leaders at the University of the Nations, Youth with a Mission here in town, right? Big evangelism school that's here. And he's kind of stepping back now because he's in his 60s to let some younger guys come in. But Danny was saved, as he says, off the beach. He was a surfer, kind of tripped out surfer dude living in Southern California. And it was through Chuck Smith's ministry that Danny was encountered by somebody and led to Christ, and was literally one of those hippies off the beach during that period of time. And so he was a young man then, but he was very much in the middle of all of that was going on, to the point that he's been part of the Kona Ministers Fellowship for a long time, and I've gotten to know Danny pretty well. Good guy. And he, at the last meeting, was really pushing this movie. And his take on it was, it's not a documentary, but it almost could be. And he said he had actually there's a couple of episodes in the movie that he was literally in the room or got it firsthand from the people who were in the room. And he said, yeah, they nailed it. And even to the point that I've not seen the movie yet, so it's on our list to go see probably this week, hopefully. But there's kind of a dust up among some of the early leaders, and he said they did it exactly the way that it happened in real life. And so he had actually gotten them to do a showing of it down at the University of the Nations, but they packed the place out. I mean, you couldn't get within half a mile of the place. So a guy that was there, that lived it, that saw it, that knew the people, that had an admiration for Chuck Smith and Greg Laurie and those other people, is saying, this is worth seeing. That was a pretty high praise for me, because Danny's not the kind of guy to give high praise if it's not deserved.
So that's exciting to hear, and that suggests maybe we need to put it on our schedule to view this week if that happens. And since we're talking about this too, and we're going to close, and thank you, by the way, guys, for enduring. When you see Peter, Paul, and Mary singing "If I Had My Way," when you see Peter, Paul, and Mary singing "This Train," right? When you see "Put Your Hand in the Hand," so some of these folks are folk singers, but some of that music was what the Jesus movement embraced when they became believers. That Crystal Blue Persuasion, if you've ever heard of that, by Tommy James and the Shondells, that was written because Tommy James became a Jesus believer, and that was his pop presentation to say Jesus is the answer. So all the imagery that's in that song is because Tommy James, through the Jesus movement, became a Jesus believer, and that's in the 70s. So that's partly why even you see some of that stuff sprinkled in our videos to help us understand that there are people that we don't think of as Christian singers who are singing music because the Jesus movement was just so vibrant in America during that late 60s, early 70s period. So thank you for that, Pastor Bruce. What stuff?
I'm just jazzed because the movie sounds like it took the traditional church and kind of laid it on its ear.
Yeah.
They had to definitely step outside their comfort zone to reach and minister to some of these people. So I'm excited to see it, just to see what that's all about.
Yeah, I'm with you, Sister Diane, because you're dealing with folks who not only were, they were doing extreme sports for that time, and they were doing extreme drugs to be able to expand their consciousness and their mentality. And so to be able to transition that Jesus was the answer to all of those psychedelic and out of mind experiences, they've had a very big impact on a lot of us that are believers today. And so when Bruce name drops Greg Laurie, Chuck Smith was huge. If you've ever listened to Every Man an Answer, the gentleman that Mike Kessler, he was a part of that movement as well. So a lot of the folks who were linchpins in some of those big churches were inspired out of the Jesus movement of the 60s and 70s.